Are you ready to move on from clear spirits to the dark side? Or did you recently leave a high demand religion and you're also ready to turn to the dark side? Well, then you're a whiskey noob. But don't worry, because we have here at Whiskey and Literature, recently we were whiskey noobs as well. I was in that high demand religion. I bought my first bottle of whiskey when I was 47 years old. And here are the first 3 bottles of whiskey that I think that you should buy, with 3 alternatives. And I know it can be intimidating and daunting. I've been that person walking into the liquor store and looking at all the things, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know any of these. Maybe you've heard of Jack Daniels or Jim Beam. So what are the first 3 bottles of whiskey that you should buy? And the parameters again for the first 3 are going to be close to $100 total for all 3 bottles. We're going to have a low proof bourbon type whiskey, then a low proof, low rye whiskey, and a higher proof bourbon. Let's go ahead and get to it. And these are my choices. I understand that everybody that you know that drinks whiskey is going to have their own opinion. Your Uncle Bob, your neighbor Steve, your significant other, whoever, they're all going to tell you what you should get. And that's great. That's the great thing about whiskey, is that we can all try these different bottles and try different things. Personally, I think it's great, and I don't mind if people have other opinions than me, because if you ask 10 people who drink whiskey, they're going to say 10 different things for this list. But let's get to it. First of all is that low proof bourbon. We're talking Jim Beam. And now I'm stepping up just a bit from that white label to the extra aged. And I don't care if you have the age stated, 7 years, or it just says Jim Beam Black. But what it is Jim Beam, just better. The Jim Beam profile is not for everybody, and I get those who have tried it and moved on, and that's fine. But I think it's a good starting point for someone new into the world of whiskey. It's nice and cheap, it's readily available, and all these bottles I'm talking about today, the prices that I'm talking about, and they are available right down the street from me at my local Total Wine & More. And a lot of these are available at your corner liquor store as well, though not all of them. This is a great gateway. I believe it is it's 90 proof and $20.99. It is a really nice intro. All right, let's move on to our low proof, low rye. And I did kind of struggle with this bottle. We stepped it up a little bit in proof and in price. And this is Jack Daniels Bonded Rye. Even if you've never drank whiskey, you've never been in a room where whiskey's being drank, you've heard of Jack Daniels. This is their Bonded Rye. This is a relatively new product for them. They've had rye for a long time, but bonded just means that it's 100 proof. It's a little higher in price, and availability is a little less, but it is available right here locally, multiple bottles on the shelf. It is $32.99 for this bottle, and it is a nice, if you will, a gateway rye, in the sense that the rye component is not super high. We'll call this, even though it's from Tennessee, a relatively Kentucky-style rye. You're going to find as you get into the world of whiskey, most of them are bourbon or bourbon-esque type bottles, relatively high amounts of corn in them, or they're made from rye. Those are the 2 predominant whiskeys in the United States. So now we're going to step it up both in price and in proof. And for those who have never thought about it, every bottle of this is 90 proof. And it is that way because they make the whiskey, they distill it, and then they add water to cut it down to that proof. These are all 100 proof because they add water to it. Now, there's another type of whiskey that's called barrel strength. And this bottle of whiskey, when I found it, when I first had it, I was like, oh man, it is so good. I want to tell everybody about this whiskey. And then I realized that everyone who drinks whiskey already knows what a great bottle Wild Turkey Rare Breed is. Again, we're stepping it up, price and proof. This is $48.99 at my local store. It is 116.8 proof. So they are adding a little bit of water to this bottle in order to get it to be a consistent 116.8 proof. And that is all right. This is definitely a different profile than the Jim Beam. All these major distilleries, they have their own profiles to the whiskey. And this is a great bottle. It's a neat sipper. It is great in cocktails. It is great over a piece of ice. You're gonna really notice a difference in also the flavor profile and in the proof if you take these two bottles step by step. And you're gonna see, and I think these will be a great introduction to the world of whiskey and will be a fantastic selection for your first 3 bottles. Now we're gonna step it up again in price and in proof in some respects and in a difficulty of finding these bottles. So the first bourbon that's a notch above, I would say, would be the Buffalo Trace. This is a little more difficult to find, but it is available again at my local store. A couple years ago, it was really difficult to find, but it is more available these days. And if you see it at more than $32.99, you should just pass on it until you find a bottle that is $32.99. It is also 90 proof, and this is such a great flavor profile. I had a group of ex-Mormon women come and stay at my Airbnb with my wife about 2 years ago. And I took 7 bottles of whiskey over there to kind of introduce them. They had never tasted whiskey before, most of them. And man, Buffalo Trace was a hit because it's such a nice sipper. And I think if you can find a bottle of this, it is pretty good. So that's a great alternative to the Jim Beam Black. Now moving to the rye. We're gonna step it up from the low rye. We're actually gonna come down in proof a little bit. We're gonna go up in price, down in proof, and higher in the rye content. One of my favorite distilleries and one of my favorite bottles of whiskey is the Rye West Double Rye. This is 90, I always want to say 94. This is 92 proof. MSRP is $37.99. Typically, I can find it quite a bit cheaper than that here in the Tampa Bay area. It is $37.99 at my Total Wine, but simply usually at these local liquor stores, they're gonna have double rye on the shelf. And usually it's gonna be cheaper, and you should never pay more than $37.99 for this bottle. This is a blend of straight ryes from Rye West and from MGP. And it's a high rye. We're talking 95.5 rye from MGP and an 80-20 rye from Rye West. So that rye spices that kind of kick in your face. It is youthful. It's younger than the Jack Daniel's bonded rye, and you're going to notice that. The flavor profile is going to be completely different than that bonded rye from Jack Daniel's. But I really enjoy it. I know what I'm getting when I'm sipping this, and I look forward to it every time. All right, going back to the barrel strength bourbon, another Jack Daniel's product, and you know what's coming here. The Jack Daniel's single barrel strength Tennessee whiskey. And people are going to argue about whether Jack Daniel's is bourbon or not. That's cool. It's certainly a bourbon-esque type whiskey, mostly corn. So it does go through another process, but we're just going to leave that for another time. This is a single barrel, meaning all the whiskey in this bottle came from one single barrel that aged together. This is also barrel strength, uncut and unfiltered. Unlike the Wild Turkey, there's no water added to this. So this is, if you will, the pure essence of Jack Daniel's. There is no alteration to the whiskey other than minimal filtering out of the barrel into the bottle. And it does, because it's barrel strength and it's a single barrel, it does vary in its proof level. This is 129.8 proof. This is widely available, $65.99 at my local Total Wine and More. And so we're definitely up in the price here. We're more like, let's see, 65. We're more like $120 minimum for these 3 bottles. But I do think these 3 are a step above the previous bottles. Difficulty level for finding them. These 2 are very available. This is slightly more difficult to find these days, but it's all good. Anyway, those are my choices for your first 3 bottles of whiskey that you should buy or alternatives. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Can you remember what your first bottle, if you're not a whiskey noob, what was your first bottle? What bottle do you recommend to your friends who maybe are drinking for their first time? I can tell you what my first bottle was. Because I was so older, I didn't have to, get the bottom shelf Wild Turkey or Four Roses or something like that. My first bottle of whiskey, for whatever reason, it was a Jack Daniel's product. It was the Sinatra Select. I figured, oh, it's 115 bucks. It's got to be good. It's got to be better. And, that is what it is. I did enjoy it. I do have a bottle of it now, and I think it's great. So, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are on my selection of bottles and what your bottles would be. All right, guys, if you've enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe to see more of my content, do both whiskey and book reviews. But for now, my friends, you know what to do. I hope you're reading something good and drinking something great, and wear that damn hat. Cheers.